My parents chose my brother over me. My grandmother saved me. Years later, my parents came to beg me. My parents threw me out when I was just a teenager, believing my twin brother's lies. Years later, they saw my success on TV, and suddenly, they wanted my money. But I wasn't the same helpless girl they abandoned. This is the story of betrayal, survival, and the ultimate revenge that left them begging. You won't believe what I made them do before I even considered helping them. I never thought a single lie could change the course of my entire life. But when my twin brother started spreading false rumors about me, it didn't just cost me my reputation, it cost me my family. My parents had always favored him, treating me like an afterthought. But when he painted me as the villain in his story, they took his side without hesitation. That was the moment I realized, no matter how much I wanted their love, I would never get it. And as much as it hurt, I had to accept it. Growing up, the favoritism was obvious. My brother, Daniel, was their golden child, the one they praised, the one they invested in, the one they believed would bring honor to the family. Meanwhile, I was just there. Every birthday, he had grand celebrations with balloons, gifts, and a crowd of friends, while I got a simple cake, if I was lucky. If he wanted something, he got it. If I asked for something, I was told to stop being ungrateful. My parents believed he was destined for greatness, while I was simply a burden. Despite it all, I tried to stay positive. I had friends at school, teachers who liked me, and a love for writing that gave me an escape. But even that was not enough to shield me from what was coming. Daniel wasn't just the favorite, he was manipulative. He saw my independence as a threat. While he struggled to make friends, I had an easy time connecting with people, and that bothered him. Then, on our 14th birthday, everything changed. I had a small celebration with my friends. They took me out for ice cream, and for the first time, I felt truly happy. Meanwhile, none of Daniel's friends showed up to his party. I don't know why they didn't come, but what I do know is that from that moment on, he resented me even more. That's when the lies started. It began with small things. He'd take something of mine, then pretend I lost it. He'd break something, then say I did it. And because my parents already saw me as the troublemaker, they believed him every time. But he didn't stop there. He wanted to ruin me completely. He started telling people at school that I was violent, that I bullied him at home. And somehow, he even convinced our parents. He would hit himself hard enough to leave bruises, and then tell them I had attacked him. I had no idea what he was doing at first. All I knew was that people started treating me differently. Friends who once stood by my side became distant. Teachers started watching me more closely. And then, one day, I was called into the principal's office. I remember sitting there, confused, as my parents, my brother, and the principal looked at me with serious faces. The principal told me that there had been accusations against me, serious accusations. Daniel, sitting next to my mother, put on the performance of a lifetime. He spoke in a quiet, shaky voice, claiming he was scared of me, that I would lash out if he ever spoke up. My parents held him like he was a wounded bird, comforting him, while I sat there, stunned. It was a lie, all of it, but no one believed me. I tried to defend myself, tried to tell the principal that Daniel was making it all up, but my father cut me off. "Enough," he said, his voice filled with disappointment. "You've embarrassed this family enough." I was suspended from school for 10 days. My parents were ashamed. And when we got home, my father did something I never expected. He packed my bags. I stood in the doorway, watching in disbelief as he threw my clothes into a suitcase, his face cold and unreadable. My mother stood behind him, her arms crossed. "You can't be serious," I said, my voice shaking. "You're kicking me out?" "You're dangerous," my father said simply. "Daniel doesn't feel safe around you. We can't have you here." I turned to my brother, my heart pounding. "Tell them the truth," I begged. "Tell them I never hurt you." He just smiled. That was the moment I realized how deep his hatred for me went. This wasn't just about revenge for his failed birthday party. He wanted me gone, and now he was getting exactly what he wanted. I tried to hold onto my father's arm, trying to make him see reason, but he shoved me back. "Enough," he snapped. "Your grandmother will be here soon. She's the only one who still wants anything to do with you." I broke. I cried. I begged, but it didn't matter. I was just a problem they wanted to be rid of. When my grandmother arrived, she was furious. She yelled at my parents, telling them they were making a terrible mistake. But they didn't care. My mother simply said, "She's not our responsibility anymore." As I climbed into my grandmother's car, I looked back at the house I had grown up in, the house I thought would always be my home. I realized I would never step foot in there again. I cried all night. My grandmother tried to comfort me, but how do you comfort a child who has just been abandoned? I felt lost, worthless. My own parents had thrown me away like I was nothing. But what I didn't know then was that this was the beginning of something greater. Because while my parents thought they had destroyed me, they had actually set me free. That night, I made myself a promise. One day, I would be so successful that they would regret ever letting me go. The first few weeks after being kicked out were the hardest. I felt like I had lost everything: my home, my family, even my sense of self. My grandmother did everything she could to comfort me, but nothing could erase the betrayal. My own parents had abandoned me, thrown me aside for something I didn't even do. My brother, the one person who should have had my back, had orchestrated it all. I spent my nights crying, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had ended up here. But my grandmother refused to let me wallow in misery. "You are more than what they think of you," she told me one morning as she placed a steaming cup of tea in front of me. "They don't define you, you do." Those words stayed with me. She enrolled me in a new school, one where no one knew my past. At first, I kept my head down, afraid that somehow the lies would follow me. But the new environment gave me a fresh start. Slowly, I started to build myself back up. I focused on my studies, poured myself into my writing, and discovered a passion for storytelling that gave me a sense of purpose. Despite the emotional wounds, I worked hard and excelled in my new school. My grandmother encouraged me every step of the way, reminding me that I had the power to shape my own future. I wasn't the weak, helpless girl my parents had cast aside. I was stronger than they ever realized. And yet, despite everything, a part of me still craved their approval. I wanted them to call, to apologize, to realize what they had done, but they never did. They never checked in, never sent a message. It was as if I had never existed to them. The only time I ever heard about them was through family gossip. My brother was still the golden child, still adored, still given everything he wanted. He had a car, a new gaming console, and my parents proudly boasted about how he would get into an Ivy League school. Meanwhile, I was the forgotten one. But I wasn't going to let their rejection define me. I worked tirelessly, balancing school and a side job to help my grandmother with expenses. I refused to ask my parents for a single dime. Every achievement, every good grade, every little success was mine and mine alone. When I graduated high school, I had earned a scholarship to a prestigious university. My grandmother was the only one who celebrated with me, the only one who cheered as I walked across the stage. My parents weren't there. They didn't even send a message. That day, I let go of the last shred of hope I had that they would ever change. College was a new chapter, a place where I could finally breathe. No one knew my story, no one knew the lies my brother had spread. I was free to be whoever I wanted to be. And I thrived. I pursued my passion for writing, taking on freelance jobs to make money on the side. It started small, writing blog posts, product descriptions, anything I could get my hands on. But as my reputation grew, so did my opportunities. Before I knew it, I was working with major clients, earning more than I ever thought possible. While my peers were struggling with student loans, I was making enough to support myself comfortably. I traveled, explored the world, and lived a life my parents never thought I could have. And then something unexpected happened. A video of mine went viral. I had been invited to a seminar to speak about content writing and freelancing. It was a simple event, nothing too grand, but someone recorded a clip and posted it online. The video took off, spreading across social media. Suddenly, people were reaching out to me, asking for advice, wanting to learn from my experience. My name was gaining recognition in my field. I started getting more opportunities, guest speaking invitations, collaborations with big companies, even a spot on a local news channel. And that's when my parents suddenly remembered I existed. It started with a missed call from my mother. I hadn't heard from her in years, and yet there it was, her name on my phone, flashing like a ghost from the past. At first, I ignored it. But then came another, and another. Finally, curiosity got the better of me, and I called back. The moment she answered, her voice was sweet, too sweet. "Oh, sweetheart, it's been so long. We saw your interview on TV. We're so proud of you." I felt a chill run down my spine. Proud? They had abandoned me, thrown me out like garbage, and now they were proud? Then came the real reason for the call. "We've been struggling financially," my father chimed in. "The house needs renovations. It's been hard for us, and we thought, since you're doing so well, you could help us out." There it was. They didn't call because they missed me. They didn't call to apologize. They called because they wanted money. I took a deep breath, my hands shaking with anger. I had spent years longing for their love, craving their approval. And now, when they finally reached out, it wasn't for me, it was for their own selfish reasons. For a moment, I wanted to scream at them, tell them how much they had hurt me. But then, an idea struck me. If they wanted my help, they were going to have to pay a price. With a calm voice, I said, "I'll help you on one condition." My father's tone shifted, suddenly eager. "Of course, anything. I want you to publicly admit everything you did to me. I want you to tell the entire family the truth, that Daniel lied, that you kicked me out for nothing, that you chose him over me. I want you to humiliate him the way you humiliated me." There was silence on the other end. Then my mother gasped, "That's unnecessary. We can talk about this privately." "No," I said firmly. "If you want my help, then you need to make things right. Otherwise, don't ever call me again." My father's voice turned angry. "We are your parents. You owe us." I laughed, a cold, bitter laugh. "I owe you nothing." And with that, I hung up. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free. After that call, I sat there staring at my phone, my heart pounding in my chest. It should have been a moment of triumph. I had finally stood up to them, finally refused to let them manipulate me. And yet, a part of me still ached. I had spent so many years longing for their love, hoping that maybe, just maybe, they would change. But they never had. They never would. For the next few days, the calls didn't stop. My parents tried everything: sweet-talking, guilt-tripping, even getting other relatives to reach out on their behalf. I ignored every single one. Then came the texts from my brother. At first, he was smug, gloating over the fact that our parents would never publicly admit the truth. But as time passed, and they realized I wasn't giving in, his messages turned nastier. "You're a selfish, ungrateful brat. You were always jealous of me. No wonder no one likes you. Mom and Dad gave you everything, and this is how you repay them? You think you're so important now just because you have money? You'll always be the loser sister." I didn't respond. Let him rant. Let him scream into the void. He had spent years tearing me down, and I wasn't going to let him do it anymore. But then, he sent something that made my blood run cold. "You think you've won? Just wait." I didn't know what he meant, but something in my gut told me it wasn't good. A few days later, I found out exactly what he was planning. It started when I received an email from an unknown sender. At first, I thought it was spam, but as soon as I opened it, my stomach dropped. Attached were screenshots of fake messages, doctored to look like I had said horrible things about my family. They made it seem like I had been bragging about cutting off my parents, insulting them, even saying I had always hated them. Then came another email from the same sender. This time, it contained screenshots of fake conversations where I supposedly admitted to lying about my brother where I made. It seemed like I had framed him all those years ago, that I had deserved to be kicked out. It didn't take a genius to figure out who was behind this. My brother had decided to wage war. I should have expected it. He had spent years manipulating people, twisting reality to fit his own version of events. Why would he stop now? Within hours, the messages had spread. Some of my extended family members, the ones who had reached out to support me after my email, started pulling away. My parents, of course, jumped on the opportunity to play the victims. My mother sent me a message filled with dramatic accusations. How could you say these things? After all we did for you, you are breaking our hearts. My father, less emotional but just as manipulative, sent a single text. You've made your choice. Don't expect us to forgive you. I felt sick. I had spent years building myself back up, creating a life free from their lies and control. And now, in a matter of days, my brother had managed to turn people against me all over again. But this time, I wasn't a scared teenager. This time, I had resources. I had connections. And most importantly, I had the truth. I wasn't going to let him win. I took a deep breath and got to work. First, I reached out to a friend who worked in cybersecurity. Within hours, they confirmed what I already knew: the messages were fabricated. They even found digital footprints linking them back to my brother's IP address. With this evidence in hand, I sent a mass email to every single person who had received my brother's lies. I included the proof, the technical breakdown showing exactly how the messages had been manipulated. I didn't just defend myself, I went on the offensive. I laid everything out. The years of favoritism, the way my brother had systematically torn me down, the way my parents had abandoned me without a second thought. And then I ended it with a simple message. If you choose to believe the lies, that's your decision. But I will not waste another second proving my worth to people who never cared about me in the first place. I pressed send. Then, for the first time in days, I exhaled. The responses came in waves. Some relatives apologized immediately, realizing they had been manipulated. Others tried to stay neutral, unwilling to pick sides. And a few, the ones who had always been closest to my parents, simply went silent. But my parents, they didn't say a word. And my brother, he lost it. He tried to fight back, sending more messages, trying to discredit my evidence. But the damage was already done. His lies had been exposed, his credibility shattered. The final blow came when my grandmother called me. "My dear," she said, her voice steady but firm, "I told you I would always be by your side." And I meant it. She had seen everything: the accusations, the fabrications, the fallout. And she had made a decision. She was cutting my parents off. They had one last chance to make things right, she said. And they chose to throw it away. For the first time in my life, I heard something I never thought I would. My parents had finally faced consequences. They had always believed they could treat me however they wanted and never face any repercussions. But now, they had lost the one person who had always supported them. As for my brother, he stopped messaging me after that. Maybe he realized he had lost. Maybe he was too ashamed to face the truth. Or maybe he was just waiting for his next opportunity. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had survived years of their mistreatment. I had built a life for myself without them. And now, I had proven that I wasn't someone they could push around anymore. For the first time in my life, I was truly free. Have you ever had to stand up against people who tried to manipulate you? If so, how did you handle it? Remember, you deserve to be treated with respect. Never let anyone make you feel otherwise. After my brother's last desperate attempt to tarnish my reputation failed, things went eerily quiet. My parents had stopped trying to reach out. My brother had gone silent, and the whirlwind of family drama that had consumed my life for the past few weeks seemed to have settled. But I knew better. People like my parents and brother don't just walk away. They don't reflect on their actions, they don't feel remorse, and they certainly don't admit when they're wrong. Instead, they scheme. They look for another angle, another way to pull you back in, to regain control. And sure enough, it wasn't long before they tried again. It started with a message from an unknown number. At first I thought it was spam, but then I read the words, "We need to talk. It's urgent." I didn't reply. I had no doubt that it was either my mother or father, probably both. When I blocked the number, another message came through from a different one. "Please, we're in trouble. We need your help." For a split second, I felt a pang of concern. But then I reminded myself who I was dealing with. This was another manipulation tactic, another attempt to guilt me into opening the door they had slammed shut years ago. I ignored it. A few hours later, I got a call from my grandmother. This time I answered. "Your mother and father are in financial trouble," she said without preamble. "They're desperate." I exhaled slowly. Of course they were. How bad is it? I asked, not because I cared about bailing them out, but because I wanted to know what they thought was a big enough crisis to warrant contacting me after years of abandonment. "They're in debt," she explained. "A lot of debt. Your father made some bad investments, and they took out loans to renovate the house, thinking they'd be able to pay them back later. But now, the money's gone. The bills are piling up, and the bank is threatening to repossess the house." I let that sink in. The house. The one they had kicked me out of without a second thought. The one they had once called a home for family, but only when it suited them. And what do they want from me? I asked, already knowing the answer. "They want you to help pay off the debt," she said. "They think, now that you're successful, you should help your family," I scoffed. "Of course they do." My grandmother hesitated before speaking again. "They're not just asking for help," she said. "They're demanding it." I nearly laughed. It was just so typical. My parents didn't reach out to apologize. They didn't reach out to make amends. They reached out because they needed something. Because suddenly, I was useful. And when I didn't respond, they escalated. The next day I woke up to a flood of messages from family members. Some were polite, asking if I could consider helping my parents. Others were outright hostile, accusing me of being cruel, selfish, ungrateful. They raised you. The least you can do is help them now. Family is supposed to support each other. You're heartless. Your parents need you, and you're just turning your back on them? I stared at the messages, my jaw clenched. None of these people had cared when I was left homeless as a teenager. None of them had reached out when I was struggling to build a life for myself. But now that my parents were in trouble, suddenly, I was expected to step in like some kind of savior. I wasn't having it. So, I did something they weren't expecting. I responded, "You're right. Family is supposed to support each other. But my parents made it very clear years ago that I was not part of their family. They kicked me out, abandoned me, ignored me for years. And now, when they need money, suddenly I'm their daughter again? No, that's not how this works. I owe them nothing." Then, I blocked every single one of them. But my parents weren't done. They showed up. I don't know how they found my address, probably through a relative, but one evening, I heard a knock at my door. I looked through the peephole and felt my stomach twist. It was them. They looked different from the last time I had seen them. My mother's face was thinner, her eyes hollowed by stress. My father, once so authoritative and proud, looked exhausted. For a brief second, I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. I didn't open the door. Instead, I turned on my security camera and let them stand outside in the cold. "Please," my mother called out. "We just need to talk." I didn't respond. "We're your parents," my father added, his voice edged with frustration. "You can't just ignore us." I could, and I did. Eventually, they gave up. As they walked away, my mother muttered something under her breath, something I barely caught, but understood perfectly. Ungrateful brat. And that was all I needed to hear. They hadn't changed. They hadn't come because they cared. They had come because they wanted something. And now that they weren't getting it, they were angry. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I just felt relieved. Relieved that I had finally, truly cut them out. Later that night, I called my grandmother to tell her what had happened. She sighed heavily. "You did the right thing," she said. "They're paying the price for their own actions now. It's not your responsibility to fix their mistakes." And she was right. For years, I had carried the weight of their cruelty, their neglect, their rejection. But now, that weight was finally gone. I was free. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members? It's never easy, but sometimes protecting your peace is the best thing you can do for yourself. Remember, you don't owe anyone your happiness, especially those who never valued you in the first place. In the days following my parents' unexpected visit, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. No more messages, no more phone calls, no more guilt tripping. It was as if my silence had finally spoken louder than their demands. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. People like my parents don't just give up. They regroup, they strategize, and they try again. Sure enough, their next move was one I should have seen coming. A few days after they left my doorstep, my grandmother called me, her voice heavy with concern. "They went to the press," she said. I frowned. "What?" "They went to one of those small local news stations," she explained. "They told them a sob story about how their ungrateful daughter abandoned them in their old age, leaving them to suffer in poverty while she lived a life of luxury." I could barely believe what I was hearing. "You're joking." "I wish I was," she sighed. "They painted you as a heartless, selfish woman who turned her back on the people who raised her. Your mother even cried on camera." I could feel the anger rising in my chest. It was one thing for them to try to manipulate me in private, but this was next level. They wanted to ruin me. They wanted to turn public opinion against me, to force me into submission by making me look like the villain. It didn't take long for me to find the article. There it was, a dramatic headline, a photo of my mother wiping away fake tears, and a carefully crafted narrative about how they had sacrificed everything for me, only to be cruelly abandoned. They had even included lies about my success, making it seem like I was sitting on millions while they struggled to keep a roof over their heads. My blood boiled. They had gone too far. For a moment, I considered staying silent. Let them cry to the press. Let them tell their lies. But then, I remembered something: bullies thrive on silence. And for years, I had been forced into silence. I wasn't that helpless teenager anymore, so I decided to respond. I reached out to the same news station and requested an interview. At first, they hesitated, but when I told them I had proof that my parents had kicked me out as a teenager and abandoned me for years, they were more than happy to hear my side of the story. A week later, I sat down in front of the camera, calm and composed. "I want to make one thing very clear," I said, looking straight at the reporter. "This is not a story about a child abandoning their parents. This is a story about parents abandoning their child. The only difference is, I survived without them." I laid it all out: the favoritism, the abuse, the lies my brother spread, how they kicked me out with nothing but a suitcase and never looked back. I even provided emails, text messages, and legal documents proving that I had been completely on my own for over a decade. And then, for the final blow, I showed them the text my brother had sent me, the one where he admitted to lying about me all those years ago. When the interview aired, the reaction was immediate. People were furious not at me, but at my parents. The once sympathetic comments on their story turned into outrage. They kicked her out as a teenager, and now they expect her to pay their bills? This is disgusting. They're not parents. They're leeches. That brother of hers is pure evil. Imagine ruining someone's life just because you were jealous. It didn't take long for my parents to realize their plan had backfired. The very next day, I got a call from my dad. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was shaky, a mixture of anger and desperation. "You ruined us," he hissed. "You humiliated us in front of everyone. We can't even show our faces at the store anymore. I hope you're happy." I was. They had spent years making me feel small, making me feel like I wasn't worthy of love, respect, or even basic human decency. But now, the truth was out there, and they had no one to blame but themselves. But, of course, they weren't done yet. When manipulation and public sympathy didn't work, they resorted to their final weapon: legal threats. A few days later, I received a letter from a lawyer claiming that my parents were considering suing me for emotional distress and defamation. I almost laughed. They really thought they could drag me into court over their lies? I forwarded the letter to my lawyer, who assured me they had no case. He even suggested that if they pushed forward, we could counter-sue for defamation. That was the last I ever heard of it. From that moment on, I was truly, completely free. I blocked my parents, my brother, and every single relative who had tried to guilt-trip me into giving them money. I cut off the toxic family ties that had haunted me for years. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I could finally breathe. My grandmother, the only real family I had left, told me how proud she was of me. "You stood up for yourself," she said. "That's something they never expected you to do." She was right. They had expected me to crumble, to cave in under the weight of their manipulation. But I didn't. I had built my life from the ground up, and no one was going to take that away from me. As I moved forward, I found myself thinking less and less about them. My work flourished, my friendships deepened, and I felt lighter than I had in years. I had spent so much of my life believing that family was something you had to hold on to, no matter how much pain they caused. But I finally understood something now. Family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who truly love and support you, the ones who choose to stand by your side. And as far as I was concerned, my family consisted of one person, my grandmother. As for my parents and my brother, they were nothing more than a distant memory. Have you ever been forced to walk away from toxic family members? It's not easy, but sometimes it's the only way to truly heal. You are not obligated to keep people in your life just because they share your DNA. You deserve peace. You deserve happiness. And most of all, you deserve to be free. Life teaches us that family is not just about blood, it's about love, respect, and mutual care. Too often, people hold on to toxic relationships simply because of shared history, believing that family bonds should never be broken. But what happens when those bonds become chains? When mistreatment, manipulation, and betrayal overshadow love, the hardest yet most necessary lesson is learning to walk away. No one, no matter their age or circumstances, deserves to be burdened by guilt or obligation toward those who have only caused them pain. True family consists of the people who stand by you, who support you in your struggles, and who celebrate your victories without expectation of personal gain. For many older adults, regret can weigh heavily. Years spent trying to mend relationships that were never meant to be whole. But it is never too late to choose peace, to surround yourself with those who truly care, and to let go of those who only take. Let this story be a reminder. Your worth is not defined by the people who failed to love you. It is defined by how you choose to love yourself. Forgiveness is for your own peace, but trust and connection must be earned.